bet you, I never thought I would call a section of the Constitution juicy, but it really is. It's juicy. Welcome back, my fellow Americans, to another episode of Freedom Friday. We're gonna have a discussion, so let's get into it. Let the ambulance pass. So we're gonna be starting getting into Article 1 of the Constitution, which deals exclusively with the legislative branch. There's a reason Article 1 deals with the legislative branch, because the founders believed that the legislative body, the lawmaking body of the government, was the most powerful, the most easily corruptible, the most easily susceptible, and they wanted to focus in and hone in on what they were going to do to limit the power of the Congress. Ultimately, it's the most dangerous branch, as the founders saw it. So, let's read it, shall we? We shall. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. Again, really short. It's like one sentence. It's kind of a lot to unpack in this one sentence. So let's deal with the easiest issue first, which is that Congress is vested with legislative power, but it's split into two bodies. It's a bicameral legislature. So firstly, you have the House of Representatives, and then secondly, you have Firstly, you have the House of Representatives, and then secondly, you have the Senate. The reason it's split up easily is that these two bodies of Congress kind of act as checks on each other. They balance power out between the two. The different types of representation also help mitigate any kind of danger of bigger states overwhelming smaller states into complying with their wishes. A state like New Jersey doesn't have as many representatives as a state like Texas or California. If you only had representatives elected by districts, those states would get no say in anything the country did. Split between the House of Representatives and the Senate does make passing laws a lot more difficult if you're looking at it simply from an efficiency standpoint. Getting everybody to kind of agree on one issue is so incredibly hard, as we all know. But efficiency isn't really the purpose of the Constitution. The purpose of the Constitution is to protect our rights. And so the purpose of splitting up the congressional bodies is to stop them from accumulating power, becoming tyrannical, and acting as oppressors for the American people. So you have to weigh the balance of the two. Efficiency on one side versus tyranny on the other side. Like, which one is more important to you? I don't know about you, but actually tyranny, high up on my list of things I don't want. If I have to sacrifice a little bit of efficiency to get there, I'm willing to make the deal. But that's kind of the stuff that like everybody already knows about. Let's get into the juicy part of this section. I bet you, I never thought I would call a section of the Constitution juicy, but it really is. It's juicy. Article 1, Section 1 is often called the vesting clause because it vests Congress with the power to create law. Okay, so let's reread the first part of Section 1 again. All legislative powers, all. That means every single legislative power, all of it, okay? Herein granted shall be vested in Congress, in a Congress of the United States. And there are two ways that Congress has handled this power. They've handled it through delegation and through non-delegation. Again, with the middle, I'm sorry. Delegation and non-delegation. I really can't figure out the two-finger thing. I should just stop doing that. Basically, there are two camps. There is the delegationist and the non-delegationist. Both camps can come together and agree that Congress is the legislative body, the only legislative body. There's a restriction against any other branch of government acting in a legislative capacity. Where these two camps differ is that delegationists believe that there is an implied enumerated set of powers that Congress has, which includes the power to delegate out some legal authority. Non-delegationists are very strict, textual. There is no ability for Congress to delegate out legal authority. From a textualist, that's what I'm trying to say, textualist perspective, the non-delegationists are correct. Congress isn't allowed to delegate out any type of legal authority to any other governing agency, whatever body. But there is some precedent for delegation. In a court case called McCulloch v. Maryland, the Supreme Court said that there are implied enumerated powers, and one of those could potentially be to give away some power. And courts are pretty lenient on the principle in general. They've allowed Congress to delegate out authority to a bunch of different agencies and bodies. There is a stipulation that the delegation of authority must be explicit and very specific. For example, Congress can't just put together a body of people and say, okay, make a law. It has to be like a body of people with a purpose, like the SEC, to say, okay, make a law controlling, this area of life. Technically speaking, the Supreme Court has never struck down a law or a delegation that Congress has given. However, there are some pretty tough consequences to this. Because Congress can delegate out a bunch of their authority, the scope and size of the government has grown in exponential amounts. For more information on that, you should check out the video on the administrative state and the progressivism video, which I believe is like 6 and 7. I'm not sure, maybe. Basically what happens is Congress delegates out powers to different agencies. Those agencies grow in scope and then basically encircle our whole of society until we're all living under this little umbrella of government overreach. Delegating out power is a threat to the very essence of the Constitution, which is the separation of powers, because there are no checks and balances on these different agencies that Congress has delegated out power to. And as they give out more and more of their power, they shrink in scope and other bodies grow in scope. The one that I think is so prevalent today is that it kind of allows Congress to slough off really difficult policy decisions. Instead of coming together and doing their jobs and agreeing on something, more often than not, they can just push it off to somebody else and say, well, we don't want to make the decision, so you make the decision, which means there's very, very little accountability for policymaking. Clearly, there's a balance between delegation and non-delegation because some of the things that the government does for us are important. For so far, we've been really lenient on the delegation side. It'd be interesting to think about, what would have happened if we were more aligned with the non-delegation side? What would we have struck down or not tolerated? What would not be in existence right now? Where would we be? I don't know. Okay, we're going to close with a quote from Justice Thomas, who is another more recent Supreme Court justice, and he said, "The judiciary's failure to enforce non-delegation doctrine comes at the cost of our Constitution and the individual liberty it protects." Well, there you go. That's it. That's all I have. I know. Amazing. So much contained in one tiny little sentence of section 1. And you didn't think it was going to be that juicy, did you? But it was. It was juicy. So much stuff. Thanks for joining me on this educational journey for another Freedom Friday video. I'll see you next week. Bye, Patriots.